The snow came early that year, swallowing the road in white silence. The man drove slowly, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went pale. His son sat beside him, bundled in a jacket 2 sizes too big, his breath fogging the window. Ahead, through the mist, the mansion loomed like a ghost. Stone cracked, windows boarded, the world long gone from its halls. "Is this it, Dad?" the boy asked quietly. The man nodded. "Yeah, this is home now." He didn't mean it, not yet. But maybe saying it aloud would make it true. They'd been living in their truck for weeks after the last shelter turned them away. His family, his former family, had made sure of that. When he'd lost his job, his dignity went with it. "You made your choices," his father had said before turning his back. Now all he had was this house, a property left behind by a distant uncle no one remembered, abandoned decades ago. He'd expected a roof, maybe 4 walls. What he found was a ruin, but it was a ruin no one could take from him, and that, for now, was enough. They stepped inside, boots crunching over frost and broken glass. The air smelled like dust and rot, old wallpaper peeling like dead bark. "Dad, it's freezing," the boy whispered. "I know," he said, striking a match. The small flame trembled before catching on a piece of scrap wood. They huddled near it, watching orange light dance across the walls. For a moment, the man imagined laughter echoing here. Christmases long gone, chandeliers glittering. Now only the wind sang through broken windows. "We'll fix it," he told his son. "One room at a time." He wasn't sure if it was a promise or a prayer. The first night, he barely slept. The cold crept under his blanket, into his bones, whispering doubts. He listened to the house, the creaks, the sighs, the shifting timbers, and wondered if it, too, resented being alive. When he finally dozed off, he dreamed of warmth, of light spilling from the windows, of voices filling the halls again. But when morning came, he woke to frost coating his eyelashes and the sound of his son coughing softly beside him. He stood, jaw set. "We start today," he said aloud. "No one freezes in my house." Their first task was simple: light. They dragged broken branches from the forest, built a fire in the old hearth, and used tin foil from their meager supplies to reflect the heat. The boy laughed when it worked, hands outstretched to the glow. "It's like magic," he said. The man smiled, his chest tightening. He'd forgotten what that sounded like. A child's joy. They melted snow for water, patched a window with cardboard, and hung their coats to dry. By nightfall, the room felt almost alive again. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was hope. Fragile, flickering, real. The next morning brought work. Endless, exhausting, honest work. He found an old toolbox in the basement, rusted shut but still usable. Nails, a hammer, a few wrenches, relics from another man's attempt to mend time. The boy helped, sweeping glass into neat piles. "We should name it," he said suddenly. "Name what?" "The house." The boy grinned. "All heroes' houses have names." The man paused, surprised. "Heroes, huh?" "You're fixing it, Dad. That makes you one." The man laughed softly. "All right then, what should we call it?" The boy looked around, thoughtful. "The Warm Place," he said. And somehow it fit. Days blurred together in rhythm. Work, fire, food, sleep. The house, piece by piece, began to thaw. He covered the leaks, cleared debris, even found a generator that coughed to life after hours of tinkering. The light bulb in the hall flickered on, for the first time in decades, casting yellow across the cracked wallpaper. His son cheered. For the first time in months, the man felt something close to pride. "See?" he told the house. "We're not leaving." He didn't know who he was talking to. The walls, the ghosts, or himself. But it didn't matter. The house listened. One night, as wind howled outside, they heard something strange, a faint knocking from upstairs. The boy stiffened. "Dad!" He grabbed a flashlight, climbing the old staircase. Each step groaned under his weight. The knocking came again, steady, deliberate. When he reached the top, he aimed the beam toward the sound, a loose shutter banging against the glass. He exhaled, half laughing at himself. "Just the wind," he muttered. Still, when he turned to go, he thought he saw a shadow move down the hallway. Small, fast, like someone watching. He told himself it was nothing, that his mind was playing tricks. But after that night, things began to shift. The air grew warmer. The fires burned longer. Tools appeared where he didn't remember leaving them. Once, he found a note on the kitchen counter. Just one line written in faded ink. "Keep going." He showed it to his son, expecting fear, but the boy only smiled. "Maybe the house likes us." The man didn't laugh, because deep down he wondered if it was true. They started clearing the main hall. Next, the largest, most broken part of the mansion. Furniture lay in heaps, glass crunching underfoot. The boy found a faded photograph under the dust, a family standing by the same fireplace they now used. "They look happy," he said. The man nodded, eyes lingering on the faces. They were, once. He set the photo on the mantel, brushing off the soot. "Let's make them proud," he whispered. By late December, the mansion began to change. The cold retreated room by room, replaced by the smell of wood smoke and soup boiling on a makeshift stove. Locals passing on the road slowed their cars, watching the faint glow of lights that hadn't burned there in years. Some whispered about a ghost returning home. Others called it a miracle. The man didn't care what they called it. He only cared that his son could sleep through the night without shivering. But peace never lasted long. One morning, they woke to the sound of an engine outside, a black truck idling in the snow. Two men stepped out, suits sharp against the white. "This property's condemned," one said coldly. "You're trespassing." The man straightened. "I inherited it. I have papers." "Then you'll also have the taxes due on it," the other sneered. 10 years unpaid. His chest tightened. "I'll find a way," he said. They laughed. "You? You can't even keep the lights on." But as they drove off, he noticed something. The lights were on, and they stayed that way. That night, he sat in the living room staring into the fire. The boy, asleep, beside him. He thought of calling his father, of swallowing pride and asking for help. But the memory of that last argument, the slammed door, the words that cut deeper than any winter wind, stopped him. "You're not family anymore." Those words had turned his heart to stone. He'd promised himself never to beg again. But looking at his son, small and fragile in the firelight, he whispered, "Maybe this house isn't the only thing that needs fixing." A week later, he found his chance. The town needed help clearing snow after a blizzard, and he volunteered. It was brutal work, hours of shoveling, fingers numb, lungs burning. But when the mayor handed him a small envelope at day's end, he felt something shift inside. not just because of the pay, but because someone had finally said, "Thank you." He walked home that night, the sky clear, stars bright over the mountain. For the first time, he didn't feel like a ghost. He used the money to buy paint, nails, and new hinges. The boy helped eagerly, splattering white across the walls, laughing when it dripped on his shoes. "We're making it pretty again," he said proudly. The man smiled, his hands rough from work. "We're making it ours." He caught his reflection in the cracked mirror. The same eyes, but softer now. He hadn't noticed before, but the house wasn't the only thing warming up. Something inside him was too. Winter deepened. Snow fell thick and heavy, sealing them off from the town. But inside, the mansion glowed. Fires burning, laughter echoing down the halls. They played cards by candlelight, read from old books found in the attic. "You think the people who lived here were happy?" the boy asked one night. The man thought for a long moment. "Maybe not all the time," he said, "but I think they loved this place enough to try." He ruffled his son's hair. "And that's all that matters." When a storm knocked down the chimney, they worked together through the night to rebuild it. Wind howled, snow whipped their faces, but they refused to stop. "It's like fighting a dragon," the boy shouted over the roar. "Then grab your sword," the man laughed, handing him a broomstick. They fought the storm with hammers and laughter, their breath visible in the freezing air. By dawn, the chimney stood tall again, smoke rising proud into the pink morning sky. The next day, something strange happened. The townspeople who once avoided the mansion began arriving. First a neighbor offering bread, then a mechanic fixing their generator for free. Soon others followed, an old teacher, a shopkeeper, even a stranger who brought paint. No one said why. Maybe they saw themselves in the man's struggle. Maybe they just wanted to help rebuild something beautiful. Either way, the mansion no longer felt alone. The man didn't realize how much it meant until one evening, when the same boy, who once hid from the cold, now stood outside, building snow lanterns. "It's beautiful," he said, watching the lights glow. His son smiled. "It's warm, Dad. Even outside, it feels warm now." The man looked around, at the flickering light spilling from the windows, at the faint laughter drifting through the air, and felt tears sting his eyes. The house wasn't just alive. It was reborn. As weeks passed, word spread about the mansion that came back from the dead. A local paper ran a small story. "Disowned father restores forgotten estate." He didn't care about fame. But when his phone rang one night and he heard his father's voice on the other end, his breath caught. "I read about you," the old man said quietly. "Didn't think you had it in you." The silence that followed felt heavy. "Neither did I," he admitted, and for the first time, neither hung up. He didn't sleep after the call. Wind pressed its face to the windows, as if eavesdropping, while the fire snapped with a restless tongue. Morning arrived blue and brittle, and the old man stood at the gate, smaller than memory, hat folded in both hands. No speeches, no excuses, just a long look at the house that refused to die, and at the son who refused to quit. "You did this?" he asked carefully. "With help," the younger man answered, gesturing to patched roof lines and thin smoke lifting like a prayer. "Mostly with stubbornness." The boy waved from the porch, hopeful as dawn. They walked the halls together, footsteps sewing past and present into a single seam. Dust still clung to crown moldings, but warmth had learned the corridors. The old man paused at the hearth, fingertips brushing the mantel where a cracked photograph watched kindly. "I was wrong," he said, simple as breath, as if those 3 words were an unfamiliar tool he needed to test. The younger man nodded, throat tight. The boy arranged firewood solemnly, announcing, "We're having soup," as if feeding someone had always been the plan. The old man smiled, eyes wet. "I'd like that." Pride thawed slowly. The thaw broke with a metallic pop. Hidden pipes burst, spraying the kitchen in a frigid fog, steam rising like startled ghosts. The boy shouted. The old man grabbed towels. The younger man killed the main valve and skidded back, boots squealing on flooded tile. Neighbors saw steam from the road and sprinted uphill with buckets, mops, and that hurry reserved for fires and newborns. Within minutes, the room became a choreography of hands. Someone herded water toward the back steps. Someone shouted for wrenches. The old man knelt without ceremony, pressing soaked towels against a copper vein that hissed. They didn't stop with a patch. The mechanic crawled beneath the house, lamp clamped between teeth, and found a stubborn manifold willing to be reasoned with. The retired mason mixed mortar that ignored Winter's opinions. The town's science teacher sketched a gravity-fed radiator loop on cardboard, then blushed when it worked. By twilight, heat began traveling like a rumor, quiet and persuasive, along pipes that hadn't carried anything but silence for years. The boy pressed both palms to the nearest radiator and grinned at the metal's friendly purr. "It's a dragon," he whispered, "and it's decided we're the treasure it guards." 2 nights later, ice dragged down the valley, and power snapped like thread. Streetlights blinked to black. Phones died mid-sigh. People did the math of distance and weather and memory, then chose boots over blankets. They climbed toward the only house with smoke and stubbornness. A nurse arrived balancing a cooler. A mother carried a baby, swaddled in urgency. An elderly couple held hands like anchor lines. He opened the door wider. "Bring your cold," he said, voice steadying itself. The old man held it open longer than necessary, as if politeness alone could warm the storm's breath. The mansion turned itself into a lighthouse. The library became a quiet ward. The ballroom accepted cots like it remembered parties and preferred these. The foyer learned to dry gloves and cheeks. Someone rigged a charging strip to the generator. Someone else brewed tea strong enough to argue with despair. The boy ferried blankets like a small, dedicated tide. The old man listened to the new boiler's heartbeat, tapping where it thickened, thinning the rhythm with a wrench and a patient hum. Outside, winter rehearsed its most convincing arguments. Inside, warmth made counterpoints in low, persuasive tones. Around midnight, a white SUV slid into the drive with bureaucratic caution. An inspector emerged, clipboard lifted like a shield against hope. "This building isn't a certified shelter," they began, voice firm with policy. He didn't argue. He led them room by room, the infant sleeping near a humming radiator, the nurse charting by lamplight, the couple wrapped in quilts, the boy refilling mugs with careful ceremony. The clipboard faltered. "This is remarkable," the inspector admitted, pen writing slower. "Document everything. We'll sort permits tomorrow. For tonight, keep going." The house exhaled as if someone had finally listened correctly. Dawn arrived, diluted and gold. Power returned to town in hiccups, appliances clearing throats in distant kitchens. Guests folded blankets, hugged strangers who had briefly become relatives, left bread and thank yous on the hall table. The old man stood in the doorway like a hinge between weather and home, hat twisting loosely in his hands. "You made a place," he said, not quite trusting the word home yet. "For more than yourself." The younger man shrugged, embarrassed and proud. "The house did. We just listened." The inspector crouched to thank the boy personally. "Warm stations save lives," they murmured. By afternoon, the idea had its own legs. Volunteers offered shifts. A carpenter measured the east wing for safe egress. The mechanic tuned the generator until it purred like a domesticated thundercloud. A local baker pledged bread every storm day. Small grants appeared from organizations that noticed when ordinary people behaved like infrastructure. The old man arrived with dusty boxes, fixtures, hinges, and a brass door knocker shaped like a rising sun. "Been saving it for a house worth knocking on," he said. 3 hands lifted it into place. When it struck the plate, the sound traveled like permission. Paperwork learned their names. The inspector returned with clipboards that smiled. Codes became puzzles, not barriers. Volunteers scrubbed the east wing until its windows remembered how to shine. The boy painted arrows that pointed toward blankets, sockets, kindness. The old man coached the boiler through another cold snap, coaxing it to speak evenly to every radiator. When the first winter concert was canceled in town, the choir came here with handheld candles and shaky harmonies. Sound climbed the staircase and sat on the banister, pleased. The chandelier, cleaned, not wired, held glass like drops of thaw that refused to fall. The house discovered it liked routines. In storms, doors opened every hour to check the steps. A chalkboard tracked blankets, batteries, borrowed books. The foyer kept a basket labeled "Dry Socks. Take 2." After storms, the ballroom hosted quiet meals and loud laughter. The boy learned the generator's moods and the tea kettle's diplomacy. The old man memorized the names of strangers who weren't strange anymore. "Infrastructure," the science teacher said, drying cups. "But with a soul." No one argued. Even the radiator ticked agreement between breaths. Outside, icicles considered a second career as chandeliers and declined. Then the big storm came, the kind old-timers name and children measure their winters against. Wind braided itself through pine and wire. Snow arrived not as flakes, but as an occupation. The town went dark in a single, decisive blink. He met the boy's eyes. The boy nodded. The old man tightened his scarf and took his post at the boiler like a captain finding the wheel. The first knock came before sunset, followed by many more. They worked by practiced map, blankets, sockets, soup, quiet corners for panic to catch its breath. The house held, as if born for this hour. At midnight, the generator coughed, the scary kind. The mechanic wasn't here. The road had given up pretending to be a road. The old man closed his eyes, listened like a doctor with a stethoscope, and adjusted a screw no one else had noticed. The engine shrugged, tried dignity, and kept it. A cheer rose, soft and reverent. The inspector, snow-dusted and grinning, arrived on skis with a thermos and a signed provisional certification stamped Emergency Warming Site. They taped it beside the sun-shaped knocker. The boy traced the letters carefully, as if they might wander off without supervision. Morning cracked open slowly. The storm kept its pride, but conceded the edges. Inside, people dozed instead of shivering. The nurse brewed stronger coffee and declared it medicine. Someone tuned a battered guitar. Someone else sang a song old enough to have outlived all its heartbreaks. The old man pressed a hand to the warm pipe and whispered thanks to whoever might be listening. The younger man moved through rooms with that tired, radiant look of people who handed out more kindness than they had and discovered it multiplies when touched. By noon, rescue crews rattled past with chains and bright jackets. They thanked the house as if it had opened its own door. Supplies arrived, blankets stamped with distant logos, boxes of batteries that blinked like tiny cities. The inspector organized a list that looked like a poem. Heat, lights, plugs, quiet. The baker arrived on snowshoes with a sled of loaves, steam curling from their paper coats. The boy assigned himself to the front steps, brushing snow between arrivals until the path learned the habit of staying clear. Every shove of the broom sounded like another yes. The storm ended finally, dramatically, like a performer remembering the value of exit. Sun shattered itself on the snow. People blinked at the brightness and began the ritual of leaving without quite leaving. They wrote their names in a ledger the librarian brought, added phone numbers, allergies, skills, small vows. The old man read it later and cried a little because the list looked like a town learning to say we. Someone hung a hand-lettered sign near the door. Warmth kept here. Return as needed. The brass knocker smiled in its gold way, catching light like a promise. News traveled properly this time, stripped of spectacle and dressed in usefulness. A regional station filmed without getting in the way. The camera found the boy labeling drawers and the old man counting blankets, lingering on faces warmed by more than radiators. The segment ended without music, just the sound of applause from the crew when the generator settled into its quiet purr. Donations arrived, but so did better things. Volunteers with trade skills, students asking to learn boiler whispering, elders teaching recipes that feed 30 with grace. The mansion stopped being a miracle and became a method. Spring winked from gutters and then decided to stay. Meltwater wrote cursive down every stair. They opened windows. The house sighed in vowels. Projects replaced emergencies. The east wing gained real insulation. The library adopted soft chairs that matched the hush. A carpenter rebuilt the front steps so boots could honor themselves arriving. The old man brought a small polished plaque he'd carved. Warmth and light. They installed it above the mantel while the boy conducted the ceremony with a whisk broom, insisting dust deserved a dignified exit. Laughter found an echo that improved it. On a Sunday without storms, the town returned with instruments and casseroles. The choir tuned itself against the steady key of the boiler. Candles flickered in mason jars along the corridor. The chandelier wore daylight like jewelry. He stood beside his father and son at the doorway, counting lanterns as if they were blessings. "We'll open the west rooms next," he said, practical hope threaded through the words. The old man squeezed his shoulder. The boy lifted the brass knocker twice. It answered with music instead of metal. People applauded nothing in particular, which is to say everything. They ended the night on the steps, breathing a season that had finally forgiven them. The mansion, patched, painted, rewired where necessary and respected where not, glowed modestly like a hearth-learning scale. We didn't find treasure, the boy said, leaning into both of them. We made it. The younger man nodded, feeling his chest unclench into a life. The old man looked at his hands, at theirs, at the door that knew their knock, and tried the word that once refused him. Home, he said. It fit. Inside, the radiators hummed the note of yes, and winter, listening, lowered its voice. Spring settled into a steady kind of kindness. The snow retreated without resentment, leaving the lawn sown with last winter's footprints and first chances. He mapped projects on butcher paper, proper sprinklers, safer exits, a vented pantry that didn't flirt with mildew. The boy lobbied for a workshop and a garden. The old man penciled boiler whispering lessons and underlined it twice. At the town meeting, they proposed making the mansion an official warming and cooling center year-round. People nodded like they'd been waiting to be asked. A councilwoman said, "File the paperwork." The inspector smiled. I brought it. Pens moved. So did history. They began with the roof. Because roofs tell the weather how serious you are. Volunteers climbed under a sky rinsed clean, prying up brittle shingles and laying down sheets that sounded like fresh pages. The boy wore a harness and pride. The old man handled the ridge cap like a violinist handles a last note. When a gust tried to argue, the team laughed and hammered in chorus. By dusk, the roof line looked less like a wound and more like a promise. Inside, the boy listened to the first rain on the new skin. Soft, even, confident. No buckets, just weather. Next came insulation, which he decided was simply the art of teaching walls to keep secrets. Cellulose drifted into cavities. Foam sealed places where the past had been leaking heat and doubt. The science teacher explained our values. The librarian handed out earplugs. The boy labeled everything with polite humor. Mind the fluff. The old man tapped the boiler's flank and said, "You're getting helpers." The boiler replied with a dignified purr. At night, the mansion slept warmer and quieter, like someone who finally trusts the dark. He woke smiling at nothing, which turned out to be everything. They planted a garden where the snow had once kept its stubborn headquarters. Raised beds rose like paragraphs, each one a sentence about food and patience. Kids learned the difference between soil and dirt. Elders taught a rhythm made of seasons. The boy stuck sunflower seeds into corners for morale. He built a small weather station from scrap, charting temperature curves that proved the house itself moderated wind like a big, gentle animal. Thermal mass, the science teacher said, beaming. The old man just nodded at the stone and murmured thanks. The mansion, pleased, wore vines like a crown. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that makes tin roofs confess. The council approved a grant for solar, and a crew arrived with panels that looked like pond water, frozen mid-breeze. They mounted them on the carriage house first, then the southern roof, wiring dovetailing with care. The generator exhaled in relief at the idea of vacations. During the ribbon snip, the boy raised a pair of scissors too big for his hand. The old man steadied him. "Cut clean," he whispered. Photons, aloof, ageless, landed on the glass and became practical. The meter spun backwards like a happy clock. Not every day, sang. A shorted switch in an old junction box threw sparks one humid night, dragging a lick of flame up a wall older than 3 wars. The alarm they'd installed screamed. The boy fetched the extinguisher. The old man cut power with emotion that had learned calm. He beat the last cinder with a wet towel, while neighbors lined the hall with buckets just in case. The scorch mark curved like a comma, a pause instead of an ending. They replaced the run with new conduit, then hosted a fire safety class. Fear turned into skill. Confidence returned. With summer came visitors who weren't cold, but lonely. The ballroom hosted job fairs and quiet breakfasts. The library gave teenagers a place to charge hope. A counselor started Tuesday nights for anyone practicing mending, sobriety, grief, marriages that needed new blueprints. He brewed coffee and kept the lights gentle. The boy stacked chairs like a small, patient architect. The old man taught half the town to listen to furnaces. On the last Tuesday of the month, they cooked one large pot of soup and let the room decide what story it was eating. Somehow, it always tasted like belonging. The call came on a thunder afternoon, rain refusing to pick a lane. A truck had slid on the ridge. The driver was shaken and 9 months pregnant. They brought her in, soaked and laughing nervously, then not laughing. The nurse was already here restocking cots. The midwife arrived with hair still wet. The boy fetched towels and boiled water, because that's what books say. Lightning stitched the sky. The boiler hummed steady notes. The chandelier held its breath. A cry rose, thin, outraged, brand new. Applause answered from every hallway. "First baby of the center," someone wrote in the ledger, grinning. The article that followed, "The baby, the panels, the storms survived," brought offers. A regional nonprofit wanted him as director. A facilities firm dangled a salary as tidy as their brochures. He walked the corridors that night with the old man, palms grazing cool stone. "It's a good offer," he admitted. "It is," the old man said. "But where does your voice steady?" He listened. The house answered in quiet plumbing and reliable light. Morning found him writing 2 letters. "Thank you sincerely," and "No, gratefully." He kept the title the town had already given him without papers. Keeper. His father, no longer the old man, now simply Dad again, started sleeping some nights in the small room off the kitchen. He repaired the sun-shaped knocker's hinge when it squeaked and baked the dense bread only memory remembers. One evening, he placed a thin envelope on the table. "For your uncles, for my sister, for anyone I let stay gone." Apologies, written in a carpenter's hand, straight and patient. They stamped them after dinner, the boy insisting each envelope deserved a little sun drawn in the corner. Weeks later, answers arrived. Some sharp, some soft. All human. It was enough. Autumn rehearsed gold on the sycamores until the whole hill remembered how to glow. The house hosted a skills fair. Boiler whispering with Dad, panel cleaning with the mechanic, Grant writing within Hassan Sassam librarian. The boy unveiled his science project, thermal mass and radiant kindness, demonstrating with hot water bottles and stones warmed in sunlight. People clapped like something bigger had been proven. The inspector presented an official plaque, Community Resilience Hub. They screwed it beside warmth and light. Paperwork, tidily framed, looked almost holy when the late sun struck it. The hall approved. Then came the wildfire warning, an orange advisory posted like a dare along the highway. Ash drifted like unwelcome snow. They moved into readiness. Go bags by the door, air purifiers purring, water barrels topped off. He called the list the librarian kept. People confirmed rides, medications, pets. The boy posted a sign. Mask Station. Take 2. Dad mapped hydrants and marked roof vents with tape. When the wind turned their way, smoke shouldered the horizon. The house shut windows, squared its shoulders, and waited. The front steps stayed swept. The brass knocker wore a damp cloth like a small practical scarf. The flames stalled at the ravine, crews carving a line with stubborn genius. Smoke held on longer, a mood that wouldn't leave the room. They hosted asthmatics in the library, toddlers under quilts, exhausted firefighters in the ballroom with cots and a country of sandwiches. Someone tuned the battered guitar again. Someone sang low enough not to startle lungs. On the 4th morning, a breeze learned mercy. Blue returned, ragged at first, then whole. People stepped outside and cried without embarrassment. He whispered thank you to the sycamores, the line crews, the stone that had kept their air almost gentle. Winter flirted early, then committed. They ran the first full-season drill like a festival with checklists. Lantern walk? Check. Generator test? Check. Soup as syllabus? Check. The boy had a growth spurt and new boots that justified their squeak. Dad built boot benches for the entryway, so arrivals could sit with dignity while untangling laces from weather. The choir rehearsed carols in the stairwell because the acoustics forgave mistakes. A reporter asked what miracle turned ruin into refuge. He gestured toward 40 hands fitting quilts into a closet labeled "Storm Begins." Here. No miracle, he said. Just neighbors given good work. On the first heavy snow, the brass knocker learned a rhythm that meant gloves. He and the boy took shifts on the steps. Dad tuned the boiler like an orchestra. The generator barely noticed the load now. The panels slept under white comforters. A man arrived who had once laughed at him in town, shoulders bent by cold and regret. He handed over a wet hat without meeting eyes. "Come in," the keeper said simply. Shame behaved well in the warmth and then excused itself. Later, the man stayed to stack wood, silence working like a handshake. The ledger added another name. In January, the council hosted a forum here on resilience. Farmers talked about soil that remembers. Teens pitched snow removal routes that made elders' porches first stops. The nurse proposed a neighbor-to-neighbor check-in app built on something older, trust. He presented their year of data, kilowatt hours saved, nights sheltered, lessons taught, songs sung. Retention? The moderator joked, nodding at the crowded ballroom. Through the roof, the boy quipped, and the roof, well insulated, proud, accepted the compliment. Dad watched from the doorway, eyes shining like someone who found his tools where he'd left them, exactly when needed. Letters continued arriving, more from family, some from strangers who had heard a radio story about a house that decided to be a friend. He answered each at the long table with a fountain pen that made sentences behave. Invitations followed. Speak here. Advise there. He said yes sometimes, no when the house asked him to. The boy started a Saturday class for kids, how to make a room warmer with blankets and kindness, how to notice the neighbor whose porch stays unshoveled, how to carry soup without losing dignity or noodles. The syllabus fit on an index card. Care. Dad's hands began to shake on cold mornings. He grumbled about it with a smile that wouldn't admit fear, then taught the boy how to tune the boiler by ear, how to listen for the squeak that means oil, and the sigh that means gratitude. One evening, after a small storm that knew when to leave, Dad sat by the hearth and fell asleep with his hat on his knee, breath soft, jaw unclenched. He didn't wake. The house held the silence gently. They laid him out in the ballroom with quilts he'd folded and the plaque he'd carved watching. The town came in ones and then in threads, weaving stories above him. Pipes repaired, winters learned, bread baked, babies warmed. The choir sang the quiet carol you can carry while crying. The boy rang the brass knocker once, not as alarm, but as thank you. They buried him by the sycamores where the soil remembers, and snow remembered to fall softly. In the ledger, the librarian wrote builder, teacher, keeper, and underlined each word as if fastening it. That night, the boiler hummed a familiar note, slightly thinner without his touch, then found its voice in everyone's hands. Spring returned the way grace does, gradually, then all at once. The mansion wore light like a habit. The plaque by the door read, warmth and light, and below it the new one read, Community Resilience Hub, and below that, the smallest, home. He stood with his son on the steps, listening to radiators and birds auditioning for the same morning. The brass knocker caught the son and threw it kindly back. We didn't discover anything, the boy said, taller now. We practiced. He nodded. People arrived with cold, with questions, with casseroles. The door knew their knock. Inside, the house said yes.